Today on Living History, it's Ma Jun.
And one day I got a phone call telling us that the head of the EPP want to have a discussion. I can't help feeling a bit nervous. I opened my app and thought that half of the major emitters, the coal power, iron, steel, cement, petrochemical, chemical companies, they were in the color red. Large number of them are state-owned enterprises. The app have put tens of thousands of the largest companies on the digital map.
Today on Living History, we're speaking with Ma Jun, one of China's most influential environmental advocates. Ma Jun began his career as an investigative journalist. He's known for his work exposing the devastating impact of industrial pollution on China's rivers and communities. His groundbreaking 1999 book, China's Water Crisis, became a pivotal work in raising awareness about the country's environmental challenges. He went on to found the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs and develop the Blue Map app, a powerful tool that allows citizens to monitor pollution data and hold corporations accountable. His efforts have been instrumental in pushing for greater corporate transparency and stricter environmental regulations in China. Ma Jun has received numerous awards, including the Goldman Environmental Prize and the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. We're very happy to speak with him today. Ma Jun, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
So paint a picture for me. When you first began reporting on environmental issues in the mid-1990s, what was the state of China's environment? How were water quality?
Yeah.
How was pollution?
I remember at that time, we have been through decades, a couple of decades of highly intensive industrialization, which benefit this country. Hundreds of millions of people started to be put out of poverty themselves. But in the meantime, we have experienced extremely difficult environmental situation. My first job in the 1990s allows me to travel extensively across the country. Before, like many Chinese, we mostly did not travel very much. By working with the media, I traveled to different places to do my all kind of interview and investigation. And through the process, I was struck by the environmental situation, particularly on the water side, because in the northern part of China, the North China Plain, for example, I realized that many rivers have been diminished to tiny stream, and quite a number of them actually have run dry most of the time in the year across the plain. And the North China Plain is the most densely populated area, and it's one of the centers for China's agriculture and industry. Of course, Beijing and Tianjin, as mega cities, are located there. And even the mother river of China, the Yellow, actually have run dry most of the time. And at the worst moment, only for more than 200 days, the river would not be able to reach the sea at that time. So the vast dry riverbed, I was shocked by that, of course.
Why was that?
First, of course, the waters distributed unevenly. The northern China got only less than 20% of the total water resources, and in the south got much more. But in general, China's per capita water resources is just roughly a quarter of the global average. So we are in shortage of water, and it's distributed highly unevenly. As a result, in the North China area, the drought, was very, very severe at that time. rivers have run dry, and some of the lakes have been highly diminished or run dry. And in the meantime, of course, this caused a big trouble for people's use of water. And underground, the water table have dropped significantly. And because there's so little clean water, there's no way to dilute all this emission. And we can see as a result, in this area, the water pollution have come to a very serious level. Rivers upon rivers, they run black, and also smells did not look right. I still remember one of my early trips to the province of Shanxi. I went there to cover some other stories that I remember on family planning. But through the valley of the Fen River, which is the longest tributary of the Yellow, I was shocked first to see the dry riverbed, very, very big riverbed, and it's completely dry. And then it started drizzling, and it started, we have a rain coming down. And in the early summer season, just like now, and suddenly, and I took a train through the valley, right, along the river, along the Fen River, and then passing through each village and towns, I can see a small stream coming out of that, with all these towns having all the smokestacks and all the smokes. And then the stream, they look colorful. They're not in the color of the right water, but some of them running black, some of them are yellowish, reddish, or some even greenish. It looks quite green. And then all these streams fed into the Fen River. And until a moment, I started seeing some water, gathered and started rolling forward in a completely black color, along the Fen River. I was just very shocked about that, because all this eventually got into the yellow. And then this made me, curious about what's going on with the people living around that. Of course, Shanxi is the center of China's coal power, coal mining and coal power. And I can see I could see all the kids playing, along the river and along the road, and I can see the dust in their face. But there's no kind of information. They would not be able to tell about the impact of all of this. So I came back to Beijing and started trying to dig it out from the library. So I still remember I went to the National Library because there was very little information that I can find. But in the library, I find some journals, some scientific journals, and which talked about some of the tributaries in that region. And it was not just normal pollutants. In this, research, they found not just normal pollutants, but also carcinogens, toxins, which can lead to bad diseases and deformation and serious diseases. So that was my first exposure, one of the first exposure to the water pollution situation in the north. And in the southern part of the country, of course, more water, but the lakes in that region. Also, some of the largest lakes in China, the topic of all the poems, they just doesn't look right. I still remember beside the third largest freshwater lake in China. Yeah, by the way, that was 1990s. Yeah, it started from 1990s, but it drags on to the, even 10 years later into the early 21st century. And I still saw them, beside the third largest freshwater lake I see the fishermen not doing fishing, but using long ladles to scoop out the algae. I remember my conversation with them. One of them told me that, look, in a hot day like this, I used to do my fishing, and when it's get really hot, we can jump into the lake and took a bath. There's all this little fish and crayfish around, but now he said the fish are gone, and we are paid to scoop out the algae.
Did he tell you around when this water pollution started?
Yeah, he basically pointed out there's a whole line of factories along the lake in not quite far from his village, and basically say, if they continue to dump, then the lake would not be clean.
We are living in a place where journalists sometimes, when they criticize something and say, here's something not going right, are receiving strong feedback and not the good kind. What was it like for you in the beginning? I assume you started writing stories about this. You were an investigative journalist. What kind of feedback would you receive?
Yeah, at that time, of course, there were those topics which are more difficult, and it's just quite normal to be put under some sort of pressure. And as a mainland Chinese, I mainly help the accredited journalists to do all this reporting. So the pressure, in some way, is just part of the normalcy. And but the moment I started putting it into a book under my own name, I wrote about some of the issues of course, all these issues I encountered and all these years, including all the, water shortage and pollution, but also the eco damage in the far western regions, northwest, southwestern regions in China, and all the 7 major water basins. Of course, this issue could be sensitive, and with the kind advice from the editors of the publishing house, an official publishing house, there was some sort of censorships being put there, and eventually making the book publishable. But even with that, after I published that, I still could feel nervous as well. Being invited particularly being invited to speak at the public event about the water situation. How much should I really push for that? It was kind of difficult to make that decision, to speak out on these issues.
So your book, of course, was the 1999 book, China's Water Crisis, in which you did something very brave. You spoke truth to power. But you achieved something that I think many other people are struggling with. Namely, you got a dialogue started with government officials, with people here, with policymakers. They started listening to you. What was the trick? What was the insight into getting into a part where they weren't just rejecting you, but were actually listening?
Yeah. First, I would say I was really lucky, because in the book, with its limited circulation, have actually managed to reach some of the targeted audiences, not just my NGO partners, the researchers in China and abroad, but particularly it reached in the hand of some of the officials from the departments in charge. from the environmental agencies to the to the other agencies in charge of land and resources. And I would say that in China has a merit-based mechanism, and the officials, they have, some of them are many of them are highly capable, and some of them are really want to resolve the problem. So they engage with me and trying to explore how to solve the problem. When I started reviewing this situation, I found that what they pay more attention is not about only my feelings or my opinions. They pay great attention to the research side, to the data, to the information I collected, and the analysis that can be drawn based on that. I think that's quite important. I still remember the time when we launched our Blue Map app, and at that time, it was, people also got a bit, I have to say, a bit shocked by that, because the app have put tens of thousands of the largest companies on the digital map that people can access on the cell phone. Where are they located, and what was their environmental performance? That was every hour. Every hour they need to report to the public, and we help to visualize that, and we help to put them together. It used to be on the 29 different provincial platforms. We brought them together and helped to visualize that. Those who are not in compliance with the laws and standards will turn red, from blue to red. And I still remember in some of the major provinces, large proportion of them were quite often in red, in the color red. And one day I got a phone call, from the Shandong provincial EPB, telling us that the head of the EPB want to have a discussion with me and with us. So we travel, to Jinan on the train, and I can't help feeling a bit nervous, because I thought that because I opened my app and thought that half of the major emitters, the coal power, iron, steel, cement, chemical companies, they were in the color red, half of them, and most of them are, large number of them are state-owned enterprises. And I felt nervous because I thought that maybe this time the pressure going to be really so big.
You were a problem to them.
Yeah. It's exposed as something that has never been exposed in that way, and explicit way. But then, in his meeting room, and when he started talking by saying that, look, this is a province with 100 million people and burning 400 million tons of coal every year. By the way, that was half of the coal burning in America, and in just that one province. And then now he said, I was ordered to clean up the air. He said I could not do it without the support from all these people in my province. But it's better for them to participate, based on the science and data. On your app, the Blue Map app, I said that, look, it was just clear. It's all there, and it's based on data. He said if eventually, through the discussion, we reached the agreement that he will create a whole mechanism of social media, basically creating a social media account for one for the province, one for each 17 municipalities, and one for each of the more than 100 districts and counties. He said, if your users, your Blue Map users, make report against any of them based on the data, I will have all these environmental agencies to follow that on social media. So basically, people started tweeting using the Chinese Weibo, the Chinese Twitter, and share that, tagging in the official account, and those local agencies, sometimes they miss one, they fail to respond, they will be tagged by the superior account, and so through that province, literally, there are tens of thousands of such reporting going on, and not just in that province, but in other provinces and cities. But just in that province, we're talking about all these major companies for the first time started reporting. Why? Because many of them have very high administrative status, sometimes higher than the local agencies. So they used to be very difficult for the agencies to check them, let alone saying, to penalize them. And so because of that, we used to suffer from this extremely low cost of violations. Those who cut corners actually became more competitive in the market. So that used to be the biggest problem, biggest challenge. But with all this public participation going on, and of course it's a multi-stakeholder, it's a closed loop. The agencies could knock the door open by saying, look, it was not me, it was the people who pile all this, all your violation records on the social media, and I can't openly fail my duty, and it was better for you to make a response to the public. So one by one, those companies started coming to make all this response. Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting as well. You got also foreign companies like Apple, like Nike to listen to you. And no offense, you were an investigative journalist and you're a writer, but you're just one man. How did you get a worldwide conglomerate to start listening to you and take seriously? Because this is not their home.
Yeah. I think the real important issue is about the fact, about the truth, what was going on. Through all these years, not just by working with the media, and then I joined an environmental consulting firm, and those big multinational companies, they were my clients, many of them. Through that, I understand there were environmental and labor challenges through their supply chain. And then later on, by compiling all this environmental data, I also was surprised to see how many of them got their subsidiaries or joint ventures on our list of violators. Make me thinking about how to engage not just their own companies, but their supply chain, based on the data, how to enable them, also hold them accountable, for all this impact. Because, this is about China as the largest factory of the world, hugely benefited through that. But in the meantime, all this waste got dumped in our backyards, contaminating the air, water, and soil and coastal sea. And we need to find a way to green that whole process. So based on that, we launched a Green Choice initiative along with 20 other NGOs in 2007 and started engaging with the brands. But at the beginning, some of them would not be, as you mentioned, we're just one person.
Give me an example.
Yeah, I still remember a meeting I think in Hong Kong, with a group of some of the world's largest textile companies, and I introduced about our work, and but they and have suggest that they can green their supply chain, and they said they all have a green supply chain policies, and but one of them told me very bluntly, look, I have in China, I just don't know who are polluting and who are not, so I can just buy from the cheapest. But I told him that, look, I happen to have a map, which I collected. The violators are there, and of course, even with that, with that, I remember some of the companies are highly, more proactive. Some of the early birds, I remember Nike and GE were one of them. The surprising case was Walmart, and suddenly I got the Walmart team contact with us and saying that they want to have a meeting. I still remember it's in a big hotel, and then the 10 staffs from the Walmart management, half on the sourcing team, half on the, I think, CSR team, and then on our side, me with my colleague. At that time, we have only 5 staffs, and they're curious about our database. I explained about that, and there are all these questions about whether the, how did we compile the data, whether it's credible, and all of this. And eventually, after that meeting, suddenly they sent more than 20 managers into our office in a residential building. I still remember in the early days, they would not even have enough. We did not have enough chair for them to sit, and they'd sit on the tea table, and then going through all these different details about how to do the checking, how to search, and how to mediate, how to make disclosure. So through that process, eventually they started arranging 2 staffs to every month to spend 3 days to run through their list and our list, making a comparison. And then when they identify problems, they push them to come to us to go through the process, making disclosure and taking corrective action and making disclosure. So that was the more proactive ones. And then I still remember 2009. Yes, when a whole series of heavy metal contamination happened in China, exposing not just the grown-ups but also children to high blood lead and chromium and all this cadmium impact. So we started doing decided to launch a campaign on the IT industry, because the other industries, the big smelters and mining companies, they're on the radar of the government management, but the IT industry was considered to be low emitting and even a virtual industry. But through our research, we understand the upstream. There's a lot of gadgets, a lot of manufacturing, and there's actually high impact there. So we started putting that together into our first report on the IT industry, and sending letters to 29 IT brands, and among them 28 after, in the following half a year, 28 of them responded. But there was one company, Apple at that time, who kind of claimed that they have a long-term policy not to disclose their supply chain. So that's it. That was the only sentence that they can give it to us. Whatever other questions we sent, following up questions on all the details about the pollution, there's no response. So that pushed us to have to do a investigation on several dozen of their suppliers. They have a highly confidential, supplier list, and so we have to make our efforts to dig it out. And I still remember all the time I spent, in the at the gate of the big factory, waiting for the workers, and following them into the dormitories, and then visit some of them in the occupational disease hospitals, and to do our interview with the female workers who suffered from that, and then of course in all these different sites to check about the impact from the water and other emissions. Still remember checking the lakes and took samples of the woods and try to create the correlation between the emission and all these violations, exceeding standards situation. And then also, to talk with the villagers who suffered through the process to check about the cases of all these diseases, including cancer, and then after 2 reports, after a year and a half of research, we got another call. We got a call, and there was a willingness to communicate. So I was in Cupertino and having all this 5-hour-long discussion. It's all about as I said, the fact. If that was the fact, I have my confidence, because it's based on data, it's based on records, enforcement, monitoring results. It's based on our own research and testing by the certified labs, and eventually one of the VPs from the companies said that as Apple, we also need certain level of environmental transparency in our supply chain management. I think that was the first time for me to hear the very word transparency from that company. So after that, they really took it seriously and hired the environmental consulting firms to check all the sites that we cited in our report, and more or less prove that those cases, and decided to weigh in, with their enhanced requirements, and eventually they became the benchmark and lead the efforts of the industry. They influence the industry and motivate in the following couple of years hundreds of major electronic and other factories to openly disclose and mitigate and really try to cut the level of emission.
I did not expect Walmart to be more responsive than Apple in the beginning.
Yeah, at the beginning, I think Walmart was at that time the largest. They have the highest value in the world at that time, but also they've been subject for very serious scrutiny by the stakeholders, particularly in their home country, and there are many NGOs and media questioning and checking about their situation. So I think they were under a lot of pressure. So they have to do all this supply chain management. So that actually, that early experience also make me think about, the need for NGOs to be created, to serve as the more neutral third party, and to audit the audit itself. So the auditors could easily say, it was not me. the NGOs also there, and we have to clearly, follow all these rules. Otherwise, the audit will not be accepted. So we create that new rules for the NGOs to audit, and then making the audit report fully transparent. Of course, taking out whatever the commercial secrets are, but the rest of it all being made published on our website. I think that eventually got the recognition by a whole group of multinationals. So today, we have all these companies decided to incorporate the use of the data we gathered from the official sources, and some of them based on the confirmed public complaints and petitions. They decided to incorporate that into their sourcing standards. And before they sign contract, they compare their list with our list. And during the process, they decided to do it. You remember I mentioned that at the beginning, it was all manual. So Walmart need to spend not many days to do every month, 3 days to do this. But now it was all based on far more automative, meaning that now it's in our blue eco chain system. Whenever there was a new kind of records, negative or positive, the managers got a push notification in their inbox or on their cell phone. And quite some of them, the companies have decided to loop in their suppliers, asking their suppliers to also subscribe their service. So meaning that they also got that push notification, and they agreed upon a whole procedure to resolve the problem. So it was quite automative, and that's why we got all this in more recent years. Many more of them coming to us. So far, it's over 32,000 suppliers.
You just mentioned NGOs, and the 1990s and 2000s were, of course, years when many foreign NGOs came to China very idealistic. The difference is this is not America, this is not Europe, this is China. Things are different here. And you don't necessarily have the same result if you behave in the same ways. What was it like for you as a Chinese person, as a Chinese expert, to work with them?
Yes, Chris. To put it into historic perspective, the industrialized countries have experienced the pollution and eco damage problem much earlier than us. And they have all these lessons to be learned, but they also have made all these efforts which generate all these experiences and solutions that we can learn from. My early days, I got really lucky to be selected as a Yale Award Fellow, and so spent my time at the great university to tap into all this vast know-how and knowledge in the West, to try to learn about how in America and Europe and Japan try to tackle all these issues. And of course, they have their own different ways of dealing with that. In their system, they could create laws and regulations, and then go to the court to drive enforcement. And the NGOs there have more space to do their own actions, such as even take to the street to do all these demonstrations and mobilizing all these open petitions. But But here, in China, we have a different national context. So some of the issues we may not be able to quite do it. At least at the beginning, our judicial system would not quite function like in the West. So to me, I reviewed this at Yale, and I did my comparative research about the different governance, and then tried to find a roadmap, try to create a roadmap. So I trust that we also need our extensive public participation, just like in the West. We may not be able to follow the Western way, but some of the great ideas, such as transparency, is something that we can get started. So with that in mind, the idea is to tap into the rapid development of IT technologies, from at that time internet, and then website, and then the mobile internet, and all of this new technologies at that time. I'm talking about 20 years ago. China started embracing that. So I think that gave a great opportunity for China to leapfrog into this information age on the environmental governance. Because in the West, to do all this transparency, it used to be so costly. You need to send letters, mail to each one of the impacted citizens, and so at that time I still remember the professor kind of saying that this is not practical in the developing world, but with the internet, it will help to democratize the access of data through in a fraction of the cost. So with that in mind, I came back and built IPE, and the first project is to create an environmental database, and the prototype, the blue map, creating this access. So this is kind of a new way of doing things. I still remember, the conversation with some of the colleagues of international NGOs here, in China, and I still remember when I told them that we would engage with we decided to send letters to 29 IT brands to launch a campaign against the IT supply chain pollution. They got a bit shocked and saying that, look, even he said, we're one of the most powerful environmental NGOs in the world, and our budget, it's not what you can even imagine. But even us have not been able to do that. To try to campaign against nearly 30 some of the world's largest brands, and so how could you do it? But eventually, this is a new way of doing this, because this is based on transparency, meaning that of course it looks like we're just sending all these letters, but behind that, it was the very hard efforts to try to motivate the government to do all their monitoring. So you do the monitoring, that's fine, but making it transparent, accessible. So that's our idea. So 2000, and I still remember 2008, we have the environmental agency. We have some of the very progressively minded environmental official, like the Vice Minister Pan Yue, and he led the efforts to create the environmental information disclosure measures. It's a very low level government bylaw, but it was very powerful. For the first time, give people the rights to access the data, but of course, how to implement that. So we have at that time, we partner with one of the international NGOs, the NRDC. At that time, Alex Wang, was in charge of that, their environmental law program. So we decided to create a index called the Pollution Information Transparency Index, PITI, and decided to assess the performance of 120 major cities in China. So that was 2008. So at that time, it hasn't been quite heard of for NGOs to assess the performance of the government agencies in China. So we got nervous, and of course, I tried to engage with the officials, and the advice I got from a friend working for the official agencies, and he basically say, look, don't make it all based on the so-called your expert opinion. Making each point, create link between each point you give to the actual data of that agency's monitoring behavior. And so that's what we did. At the beginning, it was challenging, but through the years, we started having all the local agencies more willing to engage with us, and eventually witnessed a historic progress made in China's environmental transparency. First year, we managed to only compile less than 2,000 records of violations in the first year, and then I remember it went up to tens of thousands a year, and then in some cases even more than that. So today we got more than 3.2 million of those violation records, penalty fines records in our database. So all this have helped to enable not just public supervision, but also green supply chain, green finance, and of course, this have also enabled a new model of doing all this environmental campaign and advocacy, which is different from the traditional model of the international organizations.
I wonder, do foreigners and Chinese react differently when you come and say, here's a problem?
Yeah, at the beginning, I still remember among the first 100 companies coming to us, 90% are foreign companies or their joint ventures or subsidiaries. So they did behave more proactively, in response to all this sightings of their problems, all this engagement. I think part of the reason, of course, it's because they have been through this in the West, and they have a much higher, say, environmental awareness, and they have a more matured management system to deal with all this. But one very big difference is also the open commitment they made. The Chinese companies, yes, they failed to respond at the beginning, but most of them did not make that open commitment. But for the foreign companies, many of them have made open commitment. So by failing that, it's almost like could be viewed as an unfair competition, because you claim something, but you actually would not be able to do it. So that's make them more vulnerable to the findings based on all this monitoring data. The first company coming, it's a big American firm, and the VP in charge of PR told me that, look, my boss in Hong Kong, read the South China Morning Post over his breakfast, and he was shocked to read that his company is being cited as a polluter in China. And then he canceled the year-end bonuses of all of us and required all these issues to be resolved as soon as possible. And then she realized that it cannot solve in the way of PR, have to really solve the wastewater problem. So then he decided, she brought the EHS manager, and in the following half a year, managed to not just resolve the violation problem, but also create a recycling program to cut half of the water use. So that was the beginning of all of this. Of course, to us, it was not enough just to have the foreign companies to solve the problem, because they are very tiny percentage in comparison with the much larger, local companies, so that's why 2007 we decided it was time to extend this to the supply chain, because many of the foreign companies have extensive supplier base in China, so they use many local companies, and we decided it's time for them to try to have them to leverage their sourcing power to influence those who don't care as much as they do, to influence those who did not make that open commitment, because we trust that the brands who make that commitment eventually have to be accountable for not just their own behavior, but the entire supply chain's behavior.
You've had some really incredible success, and I saw your shelf of awards over there. So you really had some high moments based on your long years of work. But it must have also been really tough at some times. What was the toughest moment for you?
Yeah, it's all these years we're trying to do something that that people would feel that it's adopted as something sensitive in this part of the world. To continue to push the envelope. It's always ended up at the other side push back a bit and through the process. So it's always quite dynamic. But I would say the first several years of our organization was particularly difficult. And because at the beginning, when we started compiling all these bad records of the corporations and started exposing all these problems, that was the time when economic development have been considered, GDP growth have been considered as the doctrine, as the highest standard rules. Even if you stop a passersby in the street, they probably would say that, look, in China is still poor, so we need to develop before we even think about the environment. So that was a moment like that, and our way of doing things, it's based on the concept of transparency and public participation, and that was not the DNA of our culture. For thousands of years, the country's run top down, and it was not quite used to that. So that's why at the beginning, when those companies approached us, many of them were not in a good mood. Some of them quite unhappy, and some of them sitting in our across the table for hours would not be able to understand if we did not want their money, then why should we spend all these efforts to collect all their so-called bad records? And of course, some of them will use more kind of intimidating or threatening tones. And I have even now still a quite young team, and so that was quite a moment of difficulties because I mean, to have them coming to us is actually the easiest way. We still have chance to communicate with them, to have them understand this is not try to get the money from you. Actually, we don't want to touch anything from any money, and this is not about trying to undermine your business. Actually, if you make disclosure, then there's a way to solve this problem, and this is all based on official data. It was not me who put you on the list. It was the government. So we still have chance to go through that. But those who choose not to come to us, but to come to all their contacts, that was the most difficult.
When did people started giving you the respect for what you were doing here in China? Was it when you won the Goldman Prize, or was it earlier? When did you feel the tides turning?
Yeah, the Goldman Prize, it was a moment that we'll never forget. It was the first time that I experienced, for all this. It's not just the big moment of putting me on the stage to receive this applause from all this thousands upon thousands of people in California. I was really touched by that, but it was the long line of audiences. I mean, waiting there to shake hands, just like the scene of those movie stars, and that was really unforgettable.
How did you find out?
Yeah, obviously the Goldman Prize was not something that you can apply. It's just basically you just being notified and ask whether you accept it or not. I mean, that was the time when I first know this. Anyway, it's quite written in a quite plain way, and basically say that here we just want to give you this award, but do you want to accept it or not? Let us know whether you accept it or not. And then there I was really, that long line of people waiting there at the theater, to a beautiful theater, and waiting there at the entrance to shake hands, and not just shake hands, but many of them tell me, that they support me, and they want us to move forward, and they want to see the supply chain to go green. They want to see that that the product they consume could be manufactured in a clean and responsible way, and so many try to cheer me up, and it was just unbelievable moment. Back in China, as I mentioned, for a long time, it's yes, we do have those targeted audience, feeling quite impressed. I have NGOs, I have research institutes, I have even officials from the agencies in charge approach me and going through all this research together, and also have me to participate to help advise some of the programs. But for most of the people, they don't know us, and very few of them know about our work, and even some of them may not fully understand why do we do this, and some of them may have questions whether this could create troubles for the economic development, so that used to be the situation. All this, I think the moment, the watershed moment, was the smog in China. Interestingly, we started from water, because I was more familiar with on the water side. And so we started by building our water pollution map. But actually, quite soon after that, we started working on air pollution. Because during my trip and all this investigation, all this gathering of the data, I could also see the air pollution got so serious.
When did that start?
Yeah, the air pollution started, more than 20 years ago. And it suddenly got a lot worse after we entered into the 21st century. From the year 2000 to 2012, in just this short period of time, China's coal combustion, coal consumption got tripled in just 11, 12 years. So through the process, not just carbon emissions really got exponentially increased, but also all this local pollution.
I want to ask you specifically about the coal-fired power plants. We still rely on a lot of coal-fired power plants, but the pollution has gotten better. Is that because of a Bloomberg map?
I think we are part of the efforts to deal with that. As I mentioned, about 15, 16 years ago, when I did our investigative tour, another tour into a trip into the Shanxi province, the epicenter for China's coal-related pollution. I find it also quite shocked, because one of our NGO partners, she had some sort of allergy problem. So when we check about the pollution situation in the northern city of Shanxi, with all this dust, and sometimes we would not be able to see quite clearly, the buildings just several hundred meters away, and she basically got quite sick suddenly, and she had some sort of allergy, and then we escorted her to the local hospital, and then in that hospital, the doctor find it just, he basically said this is just a quite normal case for him. So he's ready to just cut open and import a tube right away. And he said in this area, well, that was quite a normal practice, because it's just happened quite often to him. And to me, that level of pollution, exposure, just like the early days about the water pollution exposed at that time, when I started research into the water situation, 300 million residents, particularly from the rural countryside, did not have access to safe, clean water. And they have been exposed to all these health risks. But on the air side, we realized through all this that actually it's also become very serious. So we started putting our blue map, creating an air pollution map from 2008, and then conducted a joint research with the Renmin University on the Air Quality Transparency Index, AQTI, to try to identify, based on the WHO and other health standards, what kind of parameters need to be monitored. And we ended up finding the big gaps in our monitoring system. PM 2.5, ozone, those are the most, with a high health impact pollutants. They were not on the list of monitoring. And then it was the smog. The smog suddenly hit Beijing and the surrounding regions. And for 10 days, most of the time, the airplane would not be able to land, and then the building next door was not visible, and people's work and life got really impacted, and many started really concerned, not just about their own health, but particularly the health of their children. And I still remember at that time I had my very young kid, and some of our friends actually decided to say bye, and because they also have young children, and they some of them have asthma and other diseases, so they have to migrate, some to the other regions, but some out of China. So that was the time when suddenly, at that time, of course, we launched our Total Transparency Initiative. I still remember at that time, millions upon millions of people made their voice heard on social media, calling for the problem to be solved, for the data to be given. And eventually the top leadership made a decision to make that happen from 2013. At that time, we created the Blue Sky Roadmap, launched with 24 other NGOs, a so-called Total Transparency Initiative, calling for the automatic monitoring data to be disclosed every hour to the public. We did not expect this to happen because it has never happened in any other parts of the world. So we thought it's gonna take years for this to happen. But to our surprise, just in about half a year, the government agency in charge, the ministry, created a bylaw to require that to happen from 2014. And suddenly we got so many users. We're talking about more than 10 million downloads.
I'm still shocked by how quickly this apocalyptically bad pollution got solved. You remember one winter you could not see the next building, and the next winter we have blue skies. And I've never experienced such a dramatic shift anywhere else.
It was dramatic because at the beginning, now we talk about the first year, the whole year annual average was 89.5 micrograms for PM 2.5 in Beijing. And in the surrounding region, some of them reached over 120, and the WHO standards at that time was 10, now dropped to 5. So that was the situation. But it was very rapid, but still a painful, difficult process. I still remember first year was nearly 90, and then dropped to 80, and dropped to 70 something. And the 5-year target set for Beijing was 60. It was an extremely ambitious target to most of the officials in charge, the agencies in charge. They kind of got nervous. They thought this would never they would never be able to achieve that level of reduction. But miraculously, at that time, it dropped to 58 in 5 years.
Okay, but miraculously, I don't buy. How did they achieve it? What did they do?
Yes. I think I told you, when we analyzed the whole situation, I think the most important issue is that all these decades of industrialization and urbanization, on the environmental management, we copy laws and regulations, sometimes, just literally copy from the West, but the enforcement remains to be weak. So it means that those who cut corners became more competitive in the market. So that used to be the situation. If we want to solve the problem, we must change that dynamic. And the Blue Map help on this side by, putting all these records, monitoring, making them accessible, particularly the online monitoring data. That created a level playing field, meaning that those who cut corners, instead of being more competitive, they could be kicked out of the game. And then the public scrutiny, all this public scrutiny have pushed for the companies to change behavior. I just give you one case. This was one of the largest iron and steel companies based in Jinan. We can see that on our Blue Map, they were often in the color red, and quite often breached the standards by up to 10 times. It was a listed company, so we made a phone call to them, and then the other side basically say, when they understand what our intention, basically say, as a listed company, this is not something that we care that much. And then he just hang up. I mean, that to us, it's just a very normal interaction. And then, before it will be very difficult for us to engage because it's a state-owned enterprise. If they choose to shut the door, then there's no way for us to engage. But at that moment, our users in that city continue to make that so-called micro reporting, share that on social media, tagging the official account. And our NGO partners in that city also continue to expose that, until one day we got an open response on the social media from the local environmental agency saying that they took notice of this and they checked about the situation and find that that the violations exist, and then they decided to have the company to basically suspend the production of 3 major processes, and then they even give the reduction based on their measuring. The emission reduction, more than 2,600 tons of sulfur.
Oh my God!
400 tons of particulates, PM. That means 400 tons of PM 2.5. So that's not just helpful to that city, but even to the entire region. Eventually, this company decided to clean up the whole process and relocate to another location, and the whole process cost them more than $1 billion. But the reduction was mind-boggling, and eventually, through all these efforts, of course, our efforts is just a tiny part of that. But in China, more than 1 trillion yuan have been spent, eventually to try to clean up and try to solve the problem. And eventually the result was a vast reduction of emission. The sulfur dioxide came down from 20 million tons to 2.4 million in 10 years of time. And the nitrogen oxide being cut by half. And the industrial particulate emission came down by 75%. So as a result, in Beijing, the PM 2.5 concentration dropped from 89.5 to 30.5 last year, from 2013 to last year. and across the country, it came down. In the major regions, it came down by 56% in 10 years of time. In this city, the first month, I still remember, the first January of 2013, the monthly average was above 150. Monthly average. And for many days, it was so, smog was so severe. And this is a city average. We have quite some monitoring stations in the hilly regions. So that means that, the concentration was so high in many days. It's getting close to beyond the index. So just think about the exposure of the health risk to the people at that time. In slightly more than 10 years of time, the risks have been vastly reduced.
I wonder, do you think we will get blue skies like in Copenhagen, like in Tokyo, in Beijing in 10 years?
Yeah, I do believe that I do have some hope. I do have the hope for the air quality to be further improved. Because at this time, although China is going through quite difficult economic downturn, and there are all this argument that we may have to relax the environmental regulation.
But do we? Is it necessary to be competitive, or is it possible to not relax?
I think there are all this argument because we still have all this thinking about a zero-sum game, based on zero-sum game theory. Either you have environmental protection or you have the economic growth. But to us, we hope that we can have a more balanced, more synergized action taken, which can help both economic development and pollution control. And through all these years, we can see that China's economy continued to grow. And in the process, the pollution level have come down significantly. So I think that by itself is a proof that there is this possibility. And now we have to do it in a smarter way, because we have reached the limit on the end of the pipe solution. So further improvements got to be synchronized with the climate action and the biodiversity protection, and then try to transform our development to something, upgrade that to a high quality one, meaning that we should try to tap into this opportunity to develop renewable energy and related industries.